I'm Bianca, a 34-year-old photographer who recently became a full-time mom. My world, which had once been as clear as a perfectly tuned lens, was now blurred, filled with muted shadows, soft footsteps on the creaking floor, and silent questions that no one could answer. My son was sleeping in the center of this new world, a tiny lump of warmth in the next room, his breath barely audible through the semi-darkness, where the rustles of the night intertwined with the echoes of my loneliness. But under the layer of this external idol, with its milk, budding with sleep and endless diapers, there was something else vague, muffled, like the roar of the surf behind the wall. I found myself thinking that the house that Gaspard and I once called our refuge now seemed to have shrunk, became empty, like a split shell that had lost its pearl. The spacious terrace, which used to smell of coffee, cinnamon, and fresh hopes in the mornings, now seemed like a mockery to me. The branches above the table were tossing in the wind, creaking, as if repeating how there was no one else to talk but them. The garden, the one where we planted jasmine and laughed, dirtying our hands in black soil, now stood as an indifferent, silent witness. Its branches were entwined in some kind of alien network, and when I looked at them from the window, I saw a reflection of my own thoughts, confused, neglected, abandoned. I still vividly remember the day I returned from the hospital. Our baby was sleeping peacefully in my arms, pink and fragile like a bud. My heart was squeezed with tenderness and anxiety, and crossing the threshold, I looked for Gaspard with my eyes, ready to let warmth, tears, laughter into this moment. But he met us with a gaze that slid past us, as if right through, without pausing. "Darling, aren't you excited? Say hello to your son," I said, giving him a little push, hiding the tremor in my voice, as if it could erase the line that had arisen between us. He looked at me briefly, and I saw something familiar finally fade from his eyes. "Yes, he's wonderful, I don't know how to handle children." "Give me time," Gaspard muttered, but there was no request in those words, just a tired, indifferent statement. The Gaspard I fell in love with seemed like a shadow of himself, dissipating every day. He came back late, and in his face I saw only a mask of fatigue, broken phrases, empty gestures. In the evenings, when I was rocking my son, the silence pressed down, grew, filled the rooms and the cracks under the doors. I couldn't stand it. "Gaspard, we need to talk. This is the distance between us. It's not just about the baby, you know." He sighed and looked through me, into the distance, as if there was an explanation for everything beyond the walls, but not here, not between us. "Bianca, don't start, I'm tired. Work is a mess, I don't need another lecture." His words sparked pain in me, leaving ashes. "A lecture, Gaspard, look at us, our family, you're a father now, and I feel like I'm dragging it all alone." And that was the first time he really looked at me, but there was so much coldness in those eyes that I involuntarily shivered. "What do you want from me, Bianca? A parade? I'm here, I am working, I provide, what else?" The parade. This word struck at my very heart, as a reminder that we seem to have stopped being us. "I want you, Gaspard," the man she married, who promised to be there, not a shadow wandering around the house. He stood up abruptly, holding back his irritation. "I can't handle this right now. I'm not the enemy, Bianca, maybe you've changed." These words, though spoken casually, pierced me with icy needles. Yes, it has changed. How could it not have changed? After sleepless nights, fears, a new life that appeared in our hands. But was that supposed to separate us? Those late nights became our ritual. He arrived later than usual, and the front door creaked as a reminder of his absence. With the baby in my arms, I found myself thinking over and over again that this house, where we dreamed of a future, now seemed like a trap. "It's late again," I said one day, more to myself than to him when he came in. He dropped the keys and grunted. "Work is a mess, you wouldn't understand." "I don't understand," I looked up at him. "I remember what it was like. I remember the studio, the deadlines, the sleepless nights. But Gaspard, you're different." He tore off his tie and smiled tiredly. "Another one, because I'm working. Because I don't jump with happiness every day." His words hung in the air, sharp as shards of glass, and I suddenly realized that we both couldn't bear to be inside this crack that had grown between us. I held back the answer that was bursting from my mouth, painfully tearing my chest from the inside. It was as if someone had put their hands in my lungs and slowly started squeezing them, forcing me to choose my words more carefully, wrapping them in the silk of reason while the storm raged inside. It's not about security, Gaspard. I began slowly, trying not to break down, not to flare up, although my voice was already trembling treacherously. It's about presence. You're here, but you're not. You barely look at your son, you barely talk to me. You're like a shadow, like a sound that barely echoes off the walls. He looked at me, and there was a shadow of thought, almost regret, in it, but it faded away faster than I could grasp it. His face was as hard as if it had been carved out of stone. "What do you want from me, Bianca?" he said with annoyance. "I work on myself every day, I come home." He gestured vaguely around the room, as if the house, our walls, our son could be proof of his efforts. And all I hear are complaints. The pain of those words was raw, naked, like a cut on the skin, along which fiery salt immediately spreads. "The real complaint is that you think that's all we have." "I'm not complaining, Gaspard. I'm afraid. I'm afraid I'm losing you. I'm worried about us, about you. I see you pulling away. It's like you're hiding from us, like we're a burden. That reminds me." I stopped myself. The words stuck in my throat like a bone. The memory popped up unexpectedly, and its taste turned out to be bitter, rancid. The air turned icy. Gaspard's face tensed, his chin twitched, and his jaw clenched so that his cheekbones were sharply cut in the dimness of the room. "Because you're bringing it up again," he said abruptly. "I thought we were past that. I thought we agreed to put this behind us, Bianca." I hugged my son closer to me. His little body radiated such lively, bright warmth that it seemed to be the last thing that kept me from freezing completely in the midst of this cold. "Leave it behind," I whispered. "How can I, Gaspard, if you're acting the same way again? These late nights, this distance, this silence, it's too familiar." Gaspard flushed. He threw up his hands, pushing the air away, as if trying to shake off the weight of my words. "Is that what this is about? Do you think I'm cheating again? Is that what you're getting at?" His voice crashed against the walls, echoing in my heart. I do not know, Gaspard," I said honestly, and it was scarier than any accusation. "I do not know what to think. All I know is that something is wrong with us, and it's tearing us apart." He ran his hand through his hair, a gesture I'd learned to read since the first months I'd known him. It was his unrestrained sign of fatigue and stress. "Tearing you apart. Maybe it's your constant accusations that are tearing us apart. Maybe you're holding us back, Bianca. Have you ever thought about it?" And without waiting for my answer, he left, leaving behind a silence so thick that it seemed like you could drown in it. I sat there, feeling the room go silent without his footsteps, without his breathing, without his presence, which had already become unsteady, barely discernible. It was just another Monday, an ordinary day among a series of the same, until my phone vibrated with a notification, breaking the viscous silence. A message from an unknown number. Curiosity, mixed with the usual anxiety, pushed me to the screen. His fingers twitched. "Bianca, you don't know me, but I think it's time to find out. Gaspard lives a double life, and I'm another woman." It took me a while to realize that these words were addressed to me. A few lines that crunched through the fragile framework of my reality. I froze, trying to find something rational, something logical that could justify this. A joke, a mistake, nonsense. But then the photos appeared. Gaspard is with a woman. Her hand slid over his shoulder, too sure, too natural. And the children, trio. All three of them are painfully similar to him, the very man I once loved without looking back. The world inside me cracked. I couldn't breathe, I couldn't think. When Gaspard came home earlier than usual, I still hadn't come to my senses. I just automatically looked up at him. My voice was treacherously low, a whisper that didn't seem to belong to me. He shrugged, shaking off his coat. It was quiet in the office, he said carelessly. I silently picked up the phone. An image flooded the screen. Gaspard her the kids, proof. Yeah, that's how they kill time. His face paled, shrank into himself. The mask of indifference cracked, crumbled in an instant. Bianca, where did you get that from? Each of his words dropped like a stone somewhere deep inside me, to where something alive still lingered. Gaspard, this, your other woman. He jerked, trying to grab the phone, but I pulled away, not taking my eyes off his face. So it's true, I said dully. All those late nights, all this distance, it wasn't us, it was them. Gaspard sank into a chair and rubbed his temples, as if a migraine was about to pierce through him. Everything that was hidden behind it finally came out, shattering the illusions. Bianca, listen, it's not what you think. I laughed. It was a hollow, cracked sound that echoed in the frozen silence, breaking it like a crack on glass. The laughter broke out involuntarily, short, bitter, alien, not mine. Not what I think, I asked, feeling my lips stretch into a smile that hid an abyss. Gaspard, photos don't lie, you have a completely different family. The words rolled off my tongue slowly, as if I were tasting each of them, realizing their bitterness for the first time. For how long? I took a step towards him, peering into his face, which no longer had a hint of the old Gaspard. How long have you been lying to me? He covered his face with his hands, resting his elbows on his knees, and for a moment he seemed like a broken, completely defeated man, whom even the excuses had deserted. A few years, he breathed hollowly without looking up. It all started small. I didn't figure it out myself, like us. I didn't want it to go that far. A few years. The words hung in the air, heavy as lead weights. They settled between us, filled the room, crawled into the walls, and lay on our shoulders. Several years of lying, cheating, and a double life in which I was just one part. What has my life become? And the children? I asked, even though I already knew the answer before he even opened his mouth. He didn't answer, and he didn't need it. The truth was already in front of us, in the phone pictures, in the faces, in the eyes, in our own silence. I took a deeper breath than I needed to, and my voice came out flat, drained of blood, like a surgical incision. Now. He nodded slowly, as if he didn't fully understand that he had agreed to leave his own life. He got up and left, and the sound of the door slamming echoed in the house as the final point of a chapter that had been asking to be finished for too long. I was left alone, just me and my son, the only real thing in this chaos. His soft fingers squeezed my finger, and I held it tighter, as if it were the last anchor holding me to the surface. But when I started breathing, when the silence of the house became at least a little familiar, when I almost believed that the worst was over, life threw another twisted ball. I fed my son, sitting in an armchair by the window, stroking his tiny back, and for almost a moment I felt calm, as in pre-war times. And it was at that moment that the doorbell rang, cutting through this fragile piece with a sharp blade. I was waiting for a delivery, at most from a neighbor, and therefore, when I opened it, I could not immediately believe my eyes. Gaspard was standing in the doorway, and she's with him. That's the one, the woman in the photos, another woman. She boldly stepped forward, as if we were old acquaintances, and without a shadow of hesitation squeezed into the house, running her eyes over every object, every corner that I filled with myself, creating our comfort. That's what you have here, Bianca, she drawled with deliberate admiration. Cozy, spacious, a great place for a family. What do you think, Gaspard? I looked at him, but he avoided my gaze, staring at the floor somewhere, as if he was looking for salvation in the parquet pattern. I clenched my jaw, fighting a hot wave of anger, trying to stay still, become a wall between them and my son's crib. And what kind of family is this? I asked in an icy tone, turning to her, because, as far as I know, this is my home. She grinned, and there was a predatory gleam in her eyes that made you want to cover your face with your palms. The real family that Gaspard should have been with all this time. With me. And our 3 children. You see, we need this house more than you do. A large house for a large family. You do understand, don't you? Every word she said was a slap in the face. Sharp, biting, digging into the skin, scratching the nerves. Do I understand? I asked, and my voice trembled not from fear but from rage, from a boiling, throbbing anger that found a channel. Oh, believe me, I understand perfectly. Only a madwoman would think she had the right to say anything here. Neither you nor Gaspard have anything to do with this house. It is mine. It's all mine. And then Gaspard finally spoke up, as if he remembered that he was present at his own exposure. Bianca, maybe we should discuss this. I turned abruptly to him, and at that moment his face seemed alien to me, completely alien, like a patient in a photograph in a medical atlas, with captions to each organ but without a soul. Discuss it, I repeated, blinking in shock. Do you really think that after all this we will just sit down and discuss how you transfer my house to your mistress and her children? Meanwhile, she was already confidently packing the room, taking in the furniture, walls, and photographs, as if trying them on. Bianca, it's simple, she called over her shoulder. You have 1 child, a small apartment will suit you. We have 3, we need space. It's only fair. The word fair echoed through the room, a painful echo. Fair enough, I asked softly, feeling something inside me tighten like a spring about to snap. Do you want to talk about justice? You have no idea what that word means. She turned to Gaspard, clinging to him as if for the last support, vainly searching his face for confirmation of her audacity. Tell her, Gaspard, tell her we're moving. She has a week to get out, she said with that feigned confidence that always hides the fear of being ridiculed. But Gaspard was silent. He avoided my gaze, as if I were the sun, which it was impossible to look at without pain. His shoulders sagged like flags after a losing battle. Bianca, I do not know what to say, he managed, and in this phrase sounded all his cowardice, all his incompetence, all his incompetent attempt to hide from responsibility, hiding his eyes behind the fallen strands of hair. The confrontation hung over us, heavy as a thundercloud in the middle of a sultry day. The air was thick with unspoken words, unspoken threats, and electricity that was ready to burst into flames from a single wrong move. As they left, she glanced at me over her shoulder, sharp as a knife blade, full of anger and contempt, as if I had taken something from her that rightfully belonged to her. Gaspard didn't even dare to look back. He just bowed his head, humiliated, crushed by the weight of his own mistakes. But I knew it was just the beginning. The end has not come yet. When the door closed behind them, I remained standing in silence. The house, filled with the echo of their voices, trembled like a wound that had just been entered by a blade, but blood had not yet begun to flow. I stared into the void, the very void that once filled this house after his late returns, but now it has taken shape. Now I saw the enemy in person. They want to take my house, my sanctuary, everything that I built, filled, enlivened. They want to wipe me out of here like dust off a shelf. But the shock was slowly dissolving and power was rising in its place. Cold, clear, uncompromising. If they came for my life, let them try. And then, a day later, when my thoughts had already formed a plan, when I had prepared myself, when I had collected evidence, when icy peace spread through my veins, there was a new doorbell. It was ringing, long, confident. The beginning of a real war. I opened the door, they were standing there. Gaspard, even more depressed than before, is gray like a morning mist that has lost its shape. And next to it is her. She was just as confident, with her head held high and a gleam of triumph in her eyes that burned her skin. Time's up, Bianca, her voice rang like hot metal. We're here to move. Have you packed your things? I stood still, not a single muscle twitched. I didn't really pack my things, I said evenly, almost tenderly, but with that steely note that speaks louder than a scream. And you won't move. This house is mine. I have the documents to prove it. The woman's smile faltered. There was a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes, barely noticeable but sweet to me, like the first drop of rain in a drought. What are you talking about? I'm sorry, she said. This is Gaspard's house. We have rights too. I grinned slightly, allowing myself this luxury. That's where you're wrong. This house was given to me by my parents. Gaspard has nothing to do with him. His name is not in the documents. Nowhere. Gaspard shifted uncomfortably, as if his clothes had become tight and the air was stuffy. Bianca, he began softly, I thought we could come up with something. Think of it? I raised an eyebrow slightly. After you betrayed me, lied to me, and now you're trying to kick me and your son out of our house. No, Gaspard, I'm not going to invent anything else. The woman turned sharply to him. Her voice became shrill, broke into a panicked note. That can't be true. You're lying. Tell her she's lying. But Gaspard was silent. His eyes are downcast, his shoulders are slumped, and his back is bent. He looked as if the world had caught up with him, and now he was pressing down with all his weight. It's not a lie, I said calmly. This house is mine. You have no legal right to be here, so leave, until I called the police. The woman glanced at Gaspard, looking for at least a shadow of support, at least a remnant of dignity, but he remained silent. And that silence was the whole point of their story. But we have a family. We need this house. You can't just kick us out. Her voice was trembling with despair, and suddenly I realized that her confidence was just a screen behind which the fear of being left with nothing was hiding. The only thing I'm kicking out is lying, I replied. In the meantime, we have started this frank conversation. Let's clarify something else. Gaspard is not a high-ranking executive as you thought. He's an ordinary clerk, a simple office worker. Her face contorted. She recoiled as if she'd been slapped. The clerk, it is not true, you're lying. Gaspard, tell me she's lying. But Gaspard was silent. He was silent and stared at the floor like a man with nothing left to cling to. And that's when everything fell into place. You've been living in fantasies fueled by Gaspard's lies, I said clearly. But this game is over. Now the truth has come out. It's time for both of you to leave. You don't belong here anymore. The confrontation was intense. The air between us thickened to such an extent that it seemed as if one step forward and it would split into fragments, sharp as ice. The words hung there, not daring to leave his lips, because any of them could become a trigger. But after losing that first battle, they turned to leave. And it was then, when silence had almost returned to the house, that the mistress of her unfulfilled dreams cast a parting glance at me, full of venom, malice, and an indomitable thirst for revenge. It's not over yet, Bianca, she hissed, slowly, clearly, as if sealing her threat. You're going to regret this. Her dreams crumbled like brittle glass under the heel of truth, and if it had been an ordinary morning, fresh and clear, I might have felt relieved. But the world that once gave me morning peace was a luxury I could no longer afford. He was now a battlefield. The doorbell rang, breaking the rare calm like a stone breaking glass in the semi-darkness. I already knew who was there before I even opened it, and my heart sank into the abyss, like a stone with nothing left to cling to on its way down. She stood in the doorway, a smirk contorting her features, making her face look like a mask. Behind her, children huddled in a group, strangers to me, innocent, frightened, drawn into the dirty game of adults. Do you have the nerve to come here again? I asked, standing up straight like a warrior on guard of his castle. My voice sounded steady, even though there was a hurricane of anger, fatigue, and disgust inside. She shrugged her shoulders, as if it was just a walk. I have rights, Bianca. These kids, she nodded back, they deserve a real home. Your home, I replied, unable to help but grin. Deserve it, I repeated with a dry laugh. The only thing you deserve is a tough encounter with reality. This is my home, you're not welcome here. The grin on her face only widened. The voice became louder, feigned indignation, with that special false note that is used to attract a crowd. Oh, I'm not welcome, we'll see. Do you really think you can sit in this gorgeous house, alone, with your one child, while my children are suffering? You're heartless, Bianca, heartless beyond measure. Her words, sharp as needles, should have hurt, and they hurt, but I didn't let her see it. Heartlessness? I asked, crossing my arms over my chest. I am not someone who destroys families, using children as a bargaining chip. You did it. The first neighbors began to look out of the windows, clinging to the curtains. Their whispers gathered in a light hum, stirring the air like a swarm of invisible insects. She noticed it. Her theatricality flared up with renewed vigor, and her voice rose like an aria. Look, people, Bianca thinks she's too good to share. She thinks this palace is just for her and her child. And my children, don't they deserve a chance? I felt my fists clench. Slamming the door in her face would be too easy. It would be an escape, a weakness, a concession. No, I was standing there. Your children deserve better than a mother who drags them into other people's houses and puts on a show in the street, I said. She took a step closer. His eyes were glittering with anger, and his lips were pursed in a line of rage. Do you think you can judge me, Bianca? You, who got everything by right of birth. My children fought for every little thing, and you don't even want to give them a roof over your head. I shook my head, feeling a wave of disbelief and anger wash over me. I'm not denying your children anything, I replied, but their father, the one you stole from me, is the one you should turn your anger on. He's the one who let you all down, not me. Her face flushed red. She opened and closed her mouth like a fish on the shore, deprived of water, words, and strength. Gaspard promised us a better life. I promised this house. Do you mean to say that it's all a lie? The words hung heavy, oppressive, biting into the air like thorns. That's a lie, I confirmed. Your whole union is a lie. This house is not part of his promises. He is mine. Was, is, and will be, and you have no right to it. Her confidence was slowly draining out of her like water through her fingers. She looked around, hoping that Gaspard was somewhere nearby, that he would save the situation. But there was nothing to save. I'm not leaving, Bianca. Stop it, she cried, clutching at the last straw. Until you do the right thing for these kids. I'll set up camp right here. I'll live on your doorstep if I have to. And everyone will find out what kind of heartless witch is hiding behind the walls of this mansion. I took a deep, slow breath, letting the rage settle into cold clarity. The wind was blowing through my hair, and I was getting harder by the second. Fine, I finally said. Then get ready to be a part of the story that everyone will tell. But remember, this is my home, my walls, my life, and I will protect them, at any cost. I stared at her, unable to believe how absurd the reality could become, into which I was dragged without asking. Each of her new attacks hit me with renewed vigor, but this one was with the intention of completely knocking the ground out from under my feet. Are you going to set up camp on my property? I asked slowly, feeling rage fill my chest. I don't think so. This is your last warning. Leave now or I'll call the police. Her eyes darted over the faces of the neighbors, who were watching the play with interest, scattered along the fence, hiding behind curtains, frozen in open windows. But it must have been the determination in my voice that burned her more than all the looks. She understood. She couldn't win today. Gathering her children, pressing her lips into a thin line, she gave me one last, venomous look in which a hidden oath splashed. It's not over yet, Bianca. You think you've won, but you've just started a war. And with those words, she disappeared through the gate, leaving behind a trail of anger, resentment, and threats. A week passed, but the drama was in no hurry to leave my house. It hung like a heavy cloud in every room, soaked into the walls, soaked the air. In the evenings, when I closed my eyes, I could still hear her voice, feel that gliding, piercing gaze. I, Bianca, am a woman who thought she saw everything, but I was wrong. I thought I could shut myself out from everything, but as soon as the doorbell rang, a new chapter of the story broke in uninvited. I opened it. Gaspard stood on the threshold, indecisive, lost, with a face that was a mixture of regret, fatigue, and some kind of painful despair. Seeing him after all caused a rage in me that I didn't know I had. "What are you doing here, Gaspard? Haven't you done enough?" I gasped, and every word rang out, sharp and unforgiving. He lowered his eyes, his hands fidgeting with the edge of his jacket, as if he were looking for salvation in these gestures. "Bianca, I need to talk to you. It is important." I crossed my arms, shielding myself from him like a wall. "A conversation. After you tried to take my house away from me, after all these lies, you've got to be kidding." He swallowed, coughing guiltily, as if he wanted to speak, but his throat was dry. "Please, Bianca, I made a mistake, a huge one, I understand everything. Now I was wrong, so wrong." I couldn't help but laugh. Cold, bitter, empty. It's the kind of laugh that comes from someone who's been hurt too deeply to really cry. "A mistake?" I asked, enjoying the taste of the word. "Is that what you call it? A mistake? You've ruined our family, Gaspard. You chose her. You chose a different life. And now you're standing here. What, are you sorry?" He looked up, and for a split second, I saw a glimpse of the very person I once loved. Someone who could make me laugh at 2 in the morning, who held my hand in the most difficult moments, who dreamed with me on the terrace under the morning sun. But that glimmer faded as quickly as it had flared up. "Not just sorry, Bianca, I want to go back. Fix everything for your sake, for our son's sake." The audacity of his words left me breathless. How could he stand here, look into my eyes, and say things like everything that happened could be erased, healed, forgotten? "Do you want to go back?" I repeated, taking a step back as if I'd been hit. "After everything, after you tried to erase us from your life for her, do you think you can just come back like nothing happened?" He nodded, a desperate man clinging to the last lifeline. "Yes, Bianca, I know I don't deserve this, but I want to try, fix. I'm ready to do anything to make amends, for your sake." I shook my head. At that moment the clarity was crystal clear. Like a stream in spring, when the snow has melted, and the water runs clear, cold, without impurities. "It's too late, Gaspard. You've made your choice. Now you have to live with it. We're moving on, without you." He slumped his shoulders. Defeat slid over him, etched in every line of his face, in every gesture. "Bianca, please. Don't do that. Think about our son. He needs a father." And it stung. Pain for what could have been, for the life we could have built. For a house that could sound like laughter, not the echo of quarrels. For that family, which remained only a phantom in the past. He met his father. I looked at him like he was someone I didn't know anymore. "And where have you been? With her, with them?" I pressed my lips together, controlling myself, not letting anger get the better of me. "You're not the right man for us, Gaspard. It's time you realized that." He was still standing there, pathetic and broken, but I no longer cared about his suffering. This house, this life, this child, it was all mine, and I will defend it until my last breath. He stood there for a moment longer, a man lost in the ruins of his own creation, in the ruins of illusions that he had built himself, confident that they would last forever. Silence enveloped us, heavy and viscous, as if the night itself had frozen, watching the rest of what was once called a family crumble. Then, without saying another word, Gaspard turned around and left. His footsteps thudded on the path, and his figure disappeared into the night, becoming part of the darkness that no longer had a place on my doorstep. The last parts of my old life fell away like autumn leaves, exposing the branches of what was supposed to sprout anew. And for the first time in a long time, this new thing didn't scare me. It was mine. Quiet, real, without falsehoods and double meanings. The divorce papers were signed. Everything ended with dry legal lines, in which there was no love, no pain, only the facts, only the result. Gaspard was now just a man from the past, whose name was gradually fading from my memory, becoming a shadow that no longer darkened my doorstep. The only thing that reminded me of him was a court order on alimony, a small justice in the grand scheme of things, a paltry compensation for all that I had to go through. The evening covered the house with its tranquility. I sat in the living room, lost in thoughts about the path I had traveled, the storms that were left behind, and the silence that had now become my ally. The lamplight softly spread across the walls, and the tea cooled in the cup, leaving amber circles on the surface. And then the phone rang, disturbing the peace, as if someone had gently knocked on the door of memories. I answered, and her voice on the phone brought me fresh news, tinged with a hint of malice hidden under concern. "Hey, Bianca, you're not going to believe this. I just found out that Gaspard and his mistress are holed up in some tiny apartment. They say they do nothing but quarrel from morning to night." I found myself feeling not gloating, but something quieter, almost calm, a pang of justification, a sad confirmation that everything collapsed exactly as it should have. "Well, I can't say I'm surprised," I replied, taking a sip of tea. He was warm, spicy, and that warmth spread through his body, erasing the remnants of tension. "You reap what you sow, right?" "Absolutely, but how are you holding up? It must be hard." I looked out the window, to where the night was breathing stars behind the glass, and I felt something inside align, fall into place. It was a journey, but I'm moving on to something new. I feel a little lighter every day. I'm getting myself back more and more. "You're the strongest woman I know, Bianca, and if anything happens, I'm just one call away. Do not forget." Her words lay softly on my heart, like a blanket on a chilly evening, warming and soothing. "Thank you," I replied sincerely. "I really appreciate it." The conversation gradually drifted into lighter topics, cooking recipes, some nonsense, news that has no meaning but is so desirable in its simplicity. And when we said goodbye, I froze for a moment, looking at the room. It was my space, my sanctuary. How many battles have been fought within these walls? How much pain has been felt here? But the scars were healing. They no longer pulsed with every memory, but turned into stories of strength and resilience. I held out my hand to the camera, an old friend. For how many years I had neglected her, too preoccupied with other people's lives, other people's needs, trying to hold on to what had long since crumbled to dust. Now her weight in my hands seemed comforting, warm. I took some pictures. His son's toys, scattered on the floor, a pillow on an armchair, remembering the night vigils, a shelf with books, the open page of which fluttered from the draft. Life, unhurried, real, the way it should be. Every click of the shutter sounded like a statement, as an application for the right to be, a reminder that the past is a part of me, but it no longer controls me. I am the mistress of my time, my days, my morning cups of coffee and evening walks in the garden. When night fell, and I was cradling my son and gently putting him to bed, his tiny hand squeezed my finger. "It's going to be okay, baby," I whispered, leaning into him. "I promise." And at that moment, freed from the burden of other people's mistakes, looking out the window at the twinkling stars, for the first time in a long time I believed in the promise I had made. A huge canvas of possibilities was opening up before us, pure and wide, and I knew that now everything was really just beginning. And Gaspard and his mistress. Let them remain the chapters of a closed book, a lesson I've learned, a story I won't read again. Because my own has finally begun. Write a comment on what you think about this story, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like it. See you soon.